Can't sleep. Join the club. It's nice sitting in front of the fire. Well, I thought I'd read a book. They say that a book is a wonderful way to fall asleep. This is a short book, or so I'm told. It does have quite a few pages, but short and long books, well, short and long, it's all relative, I suppose. I'm not sure what will happen in this book, but I hope it puts you to sleep. The name of this book I will keep secret. Perhaps I will tell you at the end of this video. Perhaps I'll tell you in another video in the future. Well, let's see how this goes, shall we? Chapter 1. An unfortunate beginning. Harry wasn't the smartest kid at school, and by the time he had grown up, he certainly wasn't the smartest adult. I suppose you didn't need to be the smartest adult to get a good living, and Harry was the epitome of such an idea. He was just a simple garbage man. He didn't really get science or maths when he was younger. He claimed he was too dumb, but if he was really honest, he would tell you he just wasn't paying attention and spent his time thinking about, well, video games and new comics that are coming out at the time. However, one other thing Harry never really worried himself about, for better or for worse, were his romantic interests. Was this a big issue for Harry? No, not when he was young. But as soon as he turned 18, he realized he hadn't been in a single relationship, gone on a single date, and while his friends were gallivanting around town with lots of girls, Harry stayed behind and often played Warhammer 40,000 with his friend Paul, or as they like to call it, 40k. Paul, ironically, had a girlfriend, and he could balance his time with Harry with his time with his girlfriend, that is. No, with his girlfriend, sorry. That's a very fine text. Anyways, after a while, Harry thought, will I ever be somebody's second half? He wasn't really used to this kind of almost Shakespearean terminology. Not that he really knew who Shakespeare was, but he found himself getting philosophical as the days drew on, and wondered, is it really philosophy, or is it just loneliness? fine Saturday morning, when Harry knew, well, he didn't know anything. He didn't know this was the day he would meet somebody very special. He didn't know that this day would be the day his life would change forever. And he didn't know if this change would be for better or for worse. All he knew is that today was Warhammer Day, which is to say, Saturday. Harry and Paul always had a tradition. They'll meet up for lunch, and then they go back to Paul's place, and they play Warhammer. Harry liked playing the Necrons. He always liked this idea of an undying machine, but he didn't like the idea of a machine whose consciousness was no longer in its own body. But Harry was very scared of death. He was very scared that he wouldn't do all of the things he wanted to do. He wouldn't see all of the places he wanted to see. And he was very, very scared that one day his poor choice of being a garbage man would bite him in the butt. Harry awoke at the usual time, about 8:30, and as usual he leaned over and reached for his phone. It was an old phone. It used to belong to his brother, who, of course, was some high-up C-suite in the world of tech. Harry was the younger of the two children, but never felt that his attention was on him. He was always compared to his older brother. But anyways, he reached for his phone, and he was actually surprised to see a text from Paul. Well, then he opened the text. It read like this: Hi, Hazam. Unfortunately, I'm extremely sick. Remember that crap that we went to last week? I told you ice skating isn't for me, but you kept pushing, so here we are. Paul was, of course, prone to guilt trips. Anyway, enjoy having a Saturday by yourself, fat ass. Now it's worth mentioning that Harry wasn't fat at all, but Paul liked to call everyone fat ass. Why? Nobody really knew, but Paul liked it and used it very, very often. As Harry lay down in his bed, he was a little perplexed. He and Paul had met every Saturday for the last 5 or so years to play Warhammer. And yes, sure, there were sometimes trips that Paul had to go on for work, and sometimes there was an old, family emergency or something like that. But the truth is, Harry didn't know what to do with himself. He had no idea what to do, who to see, and supposing that it was because he was already in the Warhammer mood, he decided to drive down to his local game store, which had pretty good prices for 40k miniatures, in spite of popular belief. As Harry drove down, he was wondering, what if Paul is lying? That's what happens when you live alone, he used to mutter to himself. And muttering to himself was a sign of craziness. No, probably not. As Harry arrived at the store, he swung open the door, not with particularly a great deal of confidence, of course. Of course, he kept telling himself it was because you didn't want to make a racket. But either way, as soon as he swung open the door, a few eyes darted to see him as he strode into the store, slouched, somewhat embarrassed. "Why are you embarrassed about opening a door?" he said to himself. His eyes darted around the room, which, to be honest, was larger than most other game stores. Eventually he found on one of the walls a big, must have been a decal or some kind of a cardboard cutout perhaps. Well, it was a cardboard cutout, he guessed, of an ultramarine, with his bolt gun proudly standing in an action sort of pose. The Warhammer miniatures. He walked past the 300-pound man that smelled like he hadn't showered in about a week, and walked right past the teenagers who, looking very, very posh, were debating which version of Ticket to Ride they should buy. Either way, Harry had arrived at the Warhammer 40k section and started scanning the shelves for some kind of way to enhance his already rather healthy Necron army. At that moment he felt a slight brush against his shoulder. His heart skipped a beat as he was startled rather easily, and his eyes met with the gaze of a girl. She had a dark t-shirt, many, many bracelets, and bright pink hair. But as soon as he looked at her, she gave him a warm smile. "Hey," she said. Harry was too nervous to speak. He sort of nodded in a sort of pathetic way, and his eyes immediately darted back to the figurines. The girl, sensing his lack of confidence, asked him in a very, very gentle tone, "How long have you been interested in Warhammer?" Harry had a million thoughts going through his mind. Who is she? Did Paul send her? Is she a plant? Maybe she's some kind of a whacker at the store, trying to drum up some business. Not really understanding why this woman had approached him, he very, very politely answered, "About 5 years. Or rather, he thought it was polite. But when it came out, the sentence was very nervous, shaky, and a little scared. After he said that phrase, she smiled. Of course, he didn't see her smile because, again, his eyes darted back to the shelves. But she said, "I'm Chelsea." Harry looked at her again. "Harry," he said, with a little bit more confidence in his voice. And now, of course, his mind was scrambling for something to say. Something smart, something witty. She was very attractive, but he was never good around attractive speak to cousins and even his sisters without any problems, but, well, this was, of course, very different. "What's your army?" he said in a sort of rushed, shaky way. And Chelsea, sort of slightly surprised, said, "Well, to be frank, I really haven't started collecting yet." "Is that so?" Harry said. Now there was more curiosity than shakiness in his voice. "Well, there are many armies to choose from, you know." She quickly scanned the shelves and said, "Well, I can see that." Harry laughed, albeit very nervously. "So, what strikes your fancy?" he said, and then he was about to say Ultramarines, Necrons, Tyranids, but he realized that she didn't know what any of those were. And he also realized that by ending the phrase on "what strikes your fancy," he might have been seen as somewhat of a creep. A little perplexed, understandably, Chelsea goes, "Well, what do you mean by that? I'm not quite sure." Harry, of course, now very, very nervous, said, "What kind of alien race do you like the sound of?" This time Chelsea began to blush. "Well, I'm not sure what alien races there are in this world." Harry was about to recommend to her a 40-minute lore video by Bricky, one of his favorite YouTubers, but realized that sending this poor girl off to watch a 40-minute lore video before coming back wouldn't exactly improve his chances with her. "Well," he goes, "do you like the idea of big Marines in very strong armor fighting for their religious leader?" She said, "Well, kind of, but what other options do you have?" Yes, he thought, not another Space Marines beginner. "Well," he said, "what do you think about a hive mind creature army that, well, kind of does many things at once?" Of course, he was referring to the Tyranids, although after his one-liner description he thought, "Oh, I could have explained that better." She said, "Well, I suppose that sounds okay." And then he goes, "Well, do you know anything about Warhammer?" Realizing that he might have sounded a twinge condescending, he said, "Oh, it's okay if you don't. I was just curious." Chelsea said, "Well, my brother's always played it. They can't stop talking about it. So I thought I might as well, stick my feet in, so to speak." She smiled when she said that, and Harry got a little lost for a second. Realizing there was silence between them, he said, "Oh, yeah, cool. Well, I am here for the Necrons." And then as soon as he said that, he goes to himself, "Goodness, how stupid and selfish can you be? Why can't you talk about her for another second?" But to his surprise, Chelsea came back and entertained the idea. "Really? Necrons? Who are they?" Harry tried to default his mind the best way he could. Chelsea smiled. This universe is wacky, isn't it? Harry sort of laughed nervously again. Yeah, when you think about it, it is a bit nuts, isn't it? But he began to blush as he said that. Of course, the line wasn't delivered particularly well, but it did get a smile out of Chelsea. She briefly glanced at her wrist, at which point the screen that was around her wrist lit up. Goodness me, she said, I really do have to go soon. Harry, startled, realizing that he hadn't actually talked too much about Warhammer, said, yeah, well, I guess I'll see you later, not realizing the subtlety in her sentence. Yeah, I guess I will see you later, said Chelsea. She did a shy wave in Harry's direction, and then walked to another part of the store. She walked around for another 10 minutes or so, and then Harry realized, she had to go soon. In that time, he glanced over at her a few times, not realizing that he could have just asked for her number or something like that. He was too worried about how he looked in her eyes, and he was mulling over the miscommunication for the rest of the day. When she finally walked out of the store, Harry felt somewhat lighter, like a strain had been lifted off of his shoulders, but he also felt slightly empty, as if a warmth was just removed from his immediate reach. Damn, I wonder if I'll ever see her again, he wondered to himself. His eyes finally found the Necron pack that he was looking for. Of course, it was way more expensive than he'd hoped, but he had Christmas bonuses to spend, so why not, right? And then, as he was about to buy his pack of Necrons, he decided that he would spend it on something else. And in that moment, he had planned his date with Chelsea and exactly what they were going to do. Trouble is, he really didn't know how to contact her. The next day, it was Sunday, of course. There was no text from Paul, and Harry spent his entire morning thinking about how he could get in contact with Chelsea. Of course, he realized that sooner or later, mulling over a girl like this could be seen as creepy or stalker behavior, but then he had to remind himself that, well, I've been lonely my whole life. Why can't I think about somebody else for once? And after thinking for quite a while, and of course talking with Paul, he decided that the best course of action was to go toward that game store again the next Saturday in hopes of finding her. This did mean cancelling his game with Paul, but ironically, Paul welcomed it. It's about time you stopped complaining to me how bloody lonely you are, you bastard, he would say. And so Harry went back to the store the next Saturday. He had put on a slightly nicer shirt, and he had already derived a series of questions he would ask her. did she appear. And after an hour of loitering, looking at boxes of all sorts of things he had no intention of buying, eventually he looked towards the door, and sure enough, she walked right in. Chapter 2. A not so unfortunate date. I think I'll end it there. I hope you enjoyed what was read.